if you're going through one, you might go through both. It's up to you, both of the
options. We're live now, actually. Morning. Hi, I'm John from Broadsheet. Very welcome to Tomorrow Tonight. Is today, this morning, because David likes to get us 12 hours sleep.
All right. Yeah, okay.
30,
well, I think we'll do this on a Friday night from now on, because my sleeping patterns have become a source of public ridicule, I think.
Yes, yeah, but they can't believe that you go to bed at 7 p.m. It's
No, I don't. I go to bed about 9. I mean, look, you know, I mean, I'm not a lazy journalist like you. I have a job. That's a joke, by the way, John.
No.
But I mean, sometimes the stressors of what I do on a daily basis, you know, you require rest, and you also require rest in order to be able to do them the following day. I mean, I've seen so many professionals lose it by late nights and not being absolutely functional in the morning when you've got to be, you know, at your tip-top best.
And when you were, like, all your life, have you gone to bed at
No. There's been men get better as they get older, I hope. And you know, I've had my wild times, and it's just, I think, a case that professionalism kicks in, and if people's lives and livelihoods and responsibilities are on your shoulders, then you owe them an obligation to provide the best possible service.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. Barristers are adept at ways of parking and discarding things once done, but the point is, you've got to be in what tennis players call the zone when you're in the zone in the courtroom. It's an unremitting and unrelenting place, you know.
Yeah. You've been in court this week, David?
Yeah, every day. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and
the courts
many times in person. Sorry.
These are the courts in England, in London, obviously, and they're operating okay, are they?
They're coming back to life. It is almost like the return of people from the grave or something like that. Everybody was in Harrow Crown Court recently, and I hadn't been there in a year and a half. And you see all these absent friends or people who were there a year and a half ago, and they're all kind of sharing war stories about meeting people again for the first time in a considerable period of time. How long this will last in what seems to be a kind of stop-start capitalist universe, I don't know, because it looks like the pattern or the cycle in certain countries, certainly Britain, is lock down, open up, lock down a little more, open up a little more. I mean, that is obviously not the pattern in Ireland. Sorry?
In Ireland, we've gone just severe lockdown. That's it, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's a recipe in the present climate for economic disaster. And there was, in one of the newspapers you asked me to look at, there's people in the hotel industry and the leisure industry pointing out ad nauseum how their livelihoods are destroyed because of this. You might say, of course, that is looking at things from a monetary-driven perspective, but I don't see our present neocon/fascist coalition government providing people with the requisite levels of support, financial, to enable them not to work. I don't see a universal sustainable income being on the table. So if that's the case and you lock people down completely, then those who are not part of the plutocracy or are not mega rich or don't have independent assets and properties are simply going to go to the wall. It also shows complete lack of civic trust. I mean, the Swedes, conversely, have allowed people in a voluntary associational capacity to go about their daily life. Now, one might say that the Swedish total of deaths is graphic, but not significantly more graphic than other countries who've adopted other solutions. And at least their society thus has a degree of functionality about it based on public trust.
Yeah,
to infantilize people the way the Irish have behaved, to treat them as children. And there is a nasty combination between subliteracy and authoritarianism in the Irish ruling class, glorifying primary school teachers writ large in the Dáil, treating people as if they're 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds. It is absolutely an obscenity.
But was it ever thus? I mean, we're treated like in a state of perpetual adolescence since.
I mean, it's like people give out about a nanny state. I mean, it's much worse than that. It's
a granny state. It's kind of
it's a granny social worker, primary school teacher, talk down to you state. And this does not mean that if you oppose it in a meaningful, structured way, that you are in some respects off base. You're not. You're just talking sense.
Okay. David, the Irish Times, ministers considered phased resumption of construction activity from April 5. And work at home proof needed for mortgage approval.
Yeah, I find that deeply sinister. The banks have been a corrosive, destructive influence in Ireland. And now, not only have they lied to people, misrepresented in terms of the inflated borrowings that prior to the 2008 crash, utilizing the kind of subprime mindset of Goldman Sachs to induce people into things, reneging on tracker mortgages, reneging on promises and representations. But now they're saying to everybody, well, unless you work at home, then you're not going to be able to get a mortgage. Well, I mean, how is that going to play out? I mean, what about emergency workers who have been the heroes of the pandemic in a way, or people who have to go from home? I suppose they might have a get-out clause if your work requires you to go from home. But even so, it is an extension of that granny state you were talking about in relation to the state, that the banks are again infantilizing people and turning any form of mortgage guarantee dependent on whether they're locked up in their houses. It's quite extraordinary.
The Irish Independent First Taste of Freedom 5 kilometres limit will be lifted in April.
Oh, well, it's not big of them. Yeah, hooray. Yeah.
New guidelines for cocooners planned.
New guidelines for what?
Cocooners planned. We're cocoon, people who cocoon, but they want to decide if the limit will be 10 kilometres, 20 kilometres, or within your own county. So
right. I mean, look, it is almost as if this is a form of localization of people and almost population control and a form of social ghettoization in a way. I mean, the amount of, now, obviously, I have a dispensation in this context because I'm a practicing barrister, but the amount of mileage I got through this week alone, traveling all over. I mean, I was in Somerset in Taunton.
Are you getting stopped? Do you get stopped? Do you get stopped by police?
Well, no, I don't. But I mean, I take, obviously, I'm compliant with the mask and things like that.
Okay.
There's a huge security check as you go into a courtroom now. It's almost something you wouldn't wish on someone unless you were hardened to it as a professional. Right. You're a bit like the statue in Rio de Janeiro as they look, and they check everything, and they ask you questions in some courts about symptoms and temperatures, and it's also quite difficult policing the courtroom because different courts have different practices about distancing and where you sit. So, for example, I was in an appeal in Harrow Crown Court 2 days ago, and their structure was that the prosecution barrister was over in the front row on the left, and I was in the back row on the right.
Yeah.
And they're trying to keep people apart as much as possible. And one of the other difficulties is remembering, because you're in and out of the courtroom as you're discussing things during recesses with your client, that you've got to put the mask on when you go out to the courtroom corridor. So in the courtroom building as such, you've got to wear the mask, but not in the court.
Right. When you're not speaking in the court, can you not wear a mask?
Some do, some don't. I prefer to discard the mask once I'm in the courtroom.
And does the judge wear a mask?
No, sometimes witnesses get into the witness box wearing masks, and then they take them down when they're about to give oral evidence.
Certainly. State failing to meet mentally ill prisoners' needs.
I think I think it's a very worrying feature of state responsibility. There's a case called Osmond v UK, which deals with the concept of state authorities' responsibility when life is endangered. And the prisons have become very dangerous and there's a marked reluctance, in fairness, among British judges to lock people up for trivial offences now. And there's been a recent Court of Appeal authority where they're conscious of the right to life implications of locking people up when the prisons are so infected. And as well as that, because of COVID restrictions, many prisoners are in 23 hours in their cells. That will obviously lead to mental health levels of deterioration.
Wasn't that the case beforehand anyway? I mean,
sorry?
Wasn't that the case beforehand anyway?
It depends. Yes, to a point, but since there are no even eating or recreational or communal activities that are feasible or limited amounts of... It's almost like... by force of circumstance, a return to the sort of Victorian prison conditions that I indirectly addressed in that article I wrote for Broadsheet, which people liked on Oscar Wilde and Reading Gale. It's almost like hard labour or penal servitude by force of circumstance.
Tell me, you wanted to talk about John Gilligan. You defended him in the 90s.
It almost
lost his case at the European Court.
Myself and Adrian Hardiman represented the Gilligans in 1996, and that ultimately led to me doing the constitutional challenge to the Proceeds of Crime Act. And at the time, there was an authority called Welsh for the United Kingdom, and both of us were chiming in and saying, look, the only hope you've got of winning this is to go to European Court of Human Rights. But of course, what he did was he delayed for 24 years, relitigated cases, made all sorts of procedural applications and so on. Whereas if he had gone to the European Court of Human Rights, I would have thought that the act would have been seriously jeopardized. Now, I got hugely badly and unfairly criticised by the idiocracy of the press and elements within the profession for doing that case. But the simple fact of the matter is, and I've written about it extensively, the Proceeds of Crime Act is the beginning of the end of the quality of the justice system, because it's the lowering of the standard of proof to a civil standard to short circuit the criminal process for the purpose of asset confiscation.
But also introducing things like if information was hacked, that can be used now.
And communication between different vectors of the state on various issues, and therefore a greater degree of surveillance. But it has been followed by the gradual conditioning and acceptance of lower standards. So you've now got these civil injunctions where they can go after people for antisocial behaviour in London and evict them. You've got gang injunctions or sex injunctions where they don't have to prosecute you, but if you breach a certain specified set of conditions, you can go to prison, and they impose huge amounts of restrictions on your liberties of movement. And Priti Patel, of course, now is in Britain, and it's also in the newspapers, curtailing the right to protest. And it's got down to subjective assertions by a police officer that someone causes annoyance. So we're now criminalising annoyance or being a public nuisance or someone inconveniencing you. I mean, from a subjectively assessed, assessment-driven process. And this has been, the Gilligan case is a foundational case in a way, because it destroyed the quality of the Irish justice system. And ever since then, it has been on a slippery slope. And that slope is in Britain. We're not far, and I've written, I think, in Broadsheet, and I think I've also written in The Village magazine, we're not far to kind of preventative detention and internment, the sort of things that were evident in the Second World War and led to such foundational civil liberties cases as Liversidge v. Anderson and Lord Atkin's famous dissenting judgment, and the disgraceful decision of the American Supreme Court in Korematsu, which upheld the detention of people of Japanese origin. We're not far from the point, unless people listen to the voices in the wilderness like myself and Lord Sumption, realize that the quality of liberty and due process and privacy and movement is being destroyed systematically, and we're on the precipice in certain countries, and I think in Ireland already, in a kind of corporate police state.
Yeah, well, there's nobody publicly allowed to kind of say this.
The great Irish liberal tradition, which was always subject to a measure for its of course, but the great Irish liberal tradition is in very scant supply, both in the professions and academic life. And people, I think, are being terrified into submission, and the possibility that the slightest measure of dissent or a cry in the darkness will lead to dismissal proceedings or academic or professional misconduct proceedings. I mean, the fact of the matter is, in that respect, most of the Irish profession is a joke, certainly the legal profession, kind of people terrified into submission by status judges who don't know what they're saying or doing.
I wanted to show you you wanted to see the Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, I did see it. It's almost like one of these pratfalls you see in these sub-American comedies, like American
but even
or something.
I have to say, yeah. I mean, this is he's fallen a few times now since.
Well, I'll tell you what I think is most interesting. It's not the first fall that could happen. I think to any of us walking up something like that. And I recall happening to me when I've walked up a plane. But so it's not the first fall.
Yeah, that's one.
It's the way he
hits his shoulder like
himself.
There he goes again, and then there's a third one here now. Yeah, and then into his shoulder.
It's that in particular. That is not a fall. That is someone who has lost his sense of balance entirely. And if he's clutching onto the rail on the right-hand side, it really shows that this is a person who doesn't seem to be that healthy.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a stroke as such, but it could be a sign of an underlying... I'm not a clinician, so I don't know, but it's so gingerly and so...
Even this is kind of like crazy stuff. Look, I mean, the kind of grabbing the both... Anyway.
Well, I mean, I'm sure he's mentally very stable. I just think he's probably physically very frail. That's what it seems.
Well, his cognitive...
Well, he's 78 years of age, isn't he, or something like that?
Yeah, he is 78.
I mean, he's not... I mean, how many presidents have ever been elected in office at that age? I mean...
I think he's the oldest.
Yeah, I'm sure in American presidential terms, he's the oldest.
Can you believe that he won more votes than Obama?
Well, I mean, not necessarily, but I mean, I would have thought that it is. I mean, Churchill, of course, became Prime Minister of Britain when he was over 70, and was a brilliant Prime Minister.
The second time.
So age is not necessarily something that precludes you from high office, but and if you're mentally still up there, that's fine. But the point in his case, in Biden's case, is he must be physically very frail. It is a concerning situation, and of course, it does lead to, of course, the rights of succession. That if the president dies in office, and then or is impeached as Nixon was and Ford took over, that Kamala Harris will be president of the United States. I mean that.
Well, that
looks like a possibility. Yeah.
Well, of course, yeah, but I think that was always on the cards. I mean, I think that was.
Well, I mean, she may have run the next occasion. He may have been a caretaker for 4 years, but the point about the matter is,
I don't think he's going to survive the 4 years, though. Do you? I mean,
well, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I mean, you would be.
No, I don't mean in the sense that he's going to die, but I mean he's not cognitively, capable for this gig. I mean,
well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that is the case or it's not the case. Certainly, there are doubts about his physicality. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Are you familiar with this story, David? Ireland's Dancing with the Stars, Judge Bride Redmond. Do you know any of that?
No. Coaches
Okay.
fight. No, I'm not. No.
Okay. I was hoping you would because I don't. Okay.
You might have gathered now I'm not really a sports guy, you know?
I did. Game changer for Cork and Limerick. Irish Fields, a big week in Cheltenham.
Yeah, well, I won't be going there.
No, it was a big week.
Oh, was it? Oh, sorry, I did, but it washed all over me on that basis.
Okay, alarm over new wave and.
Well, I mean, it's all the Europeans. A lot of stuff about the Europeans anticipating and expecting a third wave, and certainly there's been a lot of draconian lockdowns throughout Europe at the moment, and there is this vaccine war, as you term it, and there's Boris triumphant with his AstroJab, and concerns about the viability. I mean, once Norwegians expressed concerns about the effectiveness of a jab, and then of course there was the French have indicated that jab is only suitable for the over 55s, which is slightly concerning, I would have thought.
Well, yeah, and Finland have banned it completely.
Yeah, but why is it only suitable for the over 55s?
Exactly, yeah. And
why is it not? Why is it suitable for them and not the under 55s? And more to the point, why has Angela Merkel definitively said she's too old to get a jab?
Too old to get the AstraZeneca one, or any of them?
Well, she said any of them.
Okay. She's what, 60?
65. Maybe she knows something we don't know.
Well, she certainly does know something that we don't. A lot of things we don't know, I'm sure.
I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
COVID rules aren't scientific, say pub bosses. They would, but
well, you might say, quoting Mandy Rice Davis, they would, wouldn't they? But the point he's making in that article, which I did read with interest, is that they're not economically sustainable. If you accept economics as a science or a pseudoscience or something other than voodoo, and I have difficulty sometimes accepting it as anything other than voodoo, certainly trickle-down economics and supply-side economics is voodoo. But the point he's making is a rather simple one, that the numbers from the livelihood perspective of the people in the leisure and publican industry will not make sense. They will not be able to have a living if the rules are applied in this way. And of course, it does show the conflict between the pseudoscience of economics and the science of science. It also shows that scientists, which was the theme in my article, which you published yesterday, which is well received, that scientists have to be conscious of the human reality or the moral compass, what Jürgen Habermas described as not being decisionist, not making decisions purely on technical criteria, but building into your decision-making matrix moral criteria about the human condition. And that means that people have to work and eat.
Yeah. Let's just move on. Sorry, Dave. Are you there?
Yeah.
Have I lost you? Are you there?
No, are you? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Just sorry, I just wanted to. I lost the page again.
All right.
A second. So, First Taste of Freedom. 1 second. The Echo. I feel sorry about this, David. Oh yeah, how lockdown has changed the UK.
Yeah, there are very alarming things being spoken about in terms of the destruction of livelihoods and businesses. It's not just spoken about, the statistical indicators are, but at least Britain is having an agonising debate about the whole thing. That seems to me crucially important, that they are at least having a discussion about it. Have you reached the point about the volcano in Iceland yet?
No. I just wanted to go to just the Financial Times, just the Strike brothers. These are the Strike founders, the Corrigan brothers or whatever, the Irish guys they've added about 100 billion to their value.
Well, I mean, it's like I saw a report in the Times laudatory about the amount of Irish partners of Goldman Sachs and their pay increases. I mean, we have venerated
Ah,
Madam
well, yeah, yeah.
far
Well,
too long.
The Irish Times love all that. Those
Yeah,
guys.
yeah,
You know,
but you know, I mean, these people should not be venerated. They should be largely despised. And in the present universe, those who are making loads of money are usually making it on the back of other people's misery.
yeah, well, no, the Times loves those
When
guys.
the statistics indicate all the big conglomerates are hiving all the money off and making more and more and more, and everybody else is scrambling for a sausage.
Yeah. Daily Star wanted.
Yes, I thought that was, I really did think that was from, you know, in a populist way, it's making a rather very serious point. For global scaremongering, vaccine nationalism, terrifying people into an early grave, and generally being a gang of pathetic people. Now, but they are all European states people, aren't they? The Daily Stars. Yeah. So it is tinged, therefore, by British chauvinism and nationalism. But having said that,
Throw in
the
a few
points
British
are,
people.
of course, entirely valid. I mean, it has been a disproportionate a matter. Vaccine trade wars are ludicrously undignified. And, you know, when people are in this deteriorated, dehumanized condition, in fairness to Britain, at least, Britain is allowing a discussion to take place and people are out and about. And there is, as Bob Geldof recently, in a recent article, he was in the paper, said quite correctly, a wonderful, at one level, anarchic streak in British life, which is a very good thing because it promotes the culture of disobedience and non-compliance within moderation. Which is why Kriti Patel's statute regulating, it's now passed, regulating the right to protest when you cause annoyance or inconvenience, particularly to a politician, because it's geared also towards people going into the Parliament building. I mean, there was a suggestion by Pat Rabbitt, I think, in Ireland, of criminalising, criticising a politician. Well, on that basis, that thing I wrote, Jack Hughes for Broadsheet, would have me locked up for 10 years. I mean, it's getting ludicrous.
You'd get life for all your columns, I think. You know.
Oh well, I'm sure they'd find some way to achieve that. Yeah.
What was I going to ask you? Oh, your column. You have a column currently on the site, touching on everything Nuremberg trials to pretty much everything. You've thrown everything into the mix. It's good piece.
Well, I mean, I'm very proud of it, and funny enough, and it's been again like these things don't come. You know, they're not as instantaneous as people think. This is something I've worked and reworked over a long period of time, and I think you edited very well. I think the point is really, it's a serious point at all sorts of levels. It is about, I obviously visited Nuremberg and the court there, and I also visited Krakow when I was a professor in Prague briefly. And it led to a series of reflections on my behalf about how certain forms of dehumanization are reoccurring, and the virus has accentuated all of this. And how we should refocus and re-understand the concept of obligations, ergo omnes, and crimes against humanity to include economic and ecological meltdown, economicide and ecocide. And of course, as well, this gradual segregation of the world and moving people away from expression, protest, liberty, movement, privacy, is ushering in a new dark age, a new form of fascism. And so it was making a very important point. One thing I did think when I reread it, because you know, in a vanity-driven way, I do check the comments, and this time none of your readers hated it; they all loved it, which was very good. But one thing I did think is that in Schindler's List, which is referenced, and you foreground the piece by Oscar Schindler's desk, which I sat on, that there is his protection or his cloak of protection that Oskar Schindler had over his workers was by convincing the Nazis that they were essential workers. And that buzzword is floating around the place now all of the time. What's essential, what's inessential, what's disposable, what's not disposable. These are very worrying trends when language is used and techno speak has taken over. Stay safe or stay unsafe. Self-isolate. All of these things are propagandistic mechanisms to exert levels of control. There was a very disturbing, what I find an odd disturbance in it, thing by John Gray in the New Statesman on Jacques Derrida, who's someone I just intellectually despise, because and Gray is pointing out Derrida, apparently true, was quite a nice human being, but his legacy, which has been to usher in the post-truth universe by his deconstructionist techniques. Now, Gray fairly makes the point that there is some value in deconstruction, but that whole level of the mangling of language and that truth is not truth and I can change my mind from one sentence to the next has been an absolute disaster, of course. As is the tolerance. Now, let's flip Derrida. As is the tolerance of not deconstructing certain expressions. What do they mean by stay safe? What do they mean by collateral damage? Yeah. What do you mean? What is beneath the surface, to use Derrida, in terms of these expressions?
Protect each other, and
the advertising and political industries have blended into one. And the blandness of our discourse is infantilizing us and killing critical thinking.
I have to say, though, Britain seems to, as you say, have a lot of dissent, public dissent. Ireland still, any dissent is regarded as a far-right power play or something, possibly neo-Nazi.
Well, I mean, one doesn't like extremism in any shape, vector, or form. We're entering an age of extremism and tribalism and chauvinism. But, some of the measures of Priti Patel have led to outcry in Council magazine and outcry among the criminal defence community. And there is a growing level of concern of the need to preserve civic decency and the rule of law and the right to protest in a peaceful and meaningful way.
But the only people who are organising these protests are organisations from the right, I guess. There's nothing from the left. There's been nothing. In fact, they've doubled down.
I don't know who. I'm too old to go in any demonstration or anything of that nature, but I don't know who's organising them. I think the larger point is not so much being physically present, but being part of a culture of criticism, which is seeking to protect human rights in what another article of mine addressed, the panopticon, the society of increasing levels of control and surveillance. And if one could do that through the New Statesman or coming on a show like this or writing something for the various things I write for them, then that seems to me a contribution. I just think Britain has a more critical and free press and a more open-ended, if somewhat anarchic, public discussion set of fora. And the blandness and uniformity of Irish media now and superficiality is jaw-dropping.
Yeah, it's 12 months of it as well. It's been an extraordinary year, really, in terms of how we covered it, in RTE, Irish Times, mainstream press in Ireland.
But it is not the Irish Times of Gageby or a Flann O'Brien.
Well, certainly not a Flann O'Brien,
No.
David,
as our paper of record, it has been thoroughly irresponsible and derelict.
Well, it's no longer the paper record. I think they acknowledged that themselves a few years ago, said that they weren't. David, what week have you had? Is it busy?
Yes, I'm in 2 Crown Court cases on Monday, various other tasks to do. I lecture in Middlesex University. In fact, this thing on crimes against humanity I've sent to my students for one of their assessments. So it was a convenient publication in that sense. Can I say something about the volcano?
Of course,
I've got a great story about it. The volcano has now erupted in Reykjavik for the first time in 600 years or something like that. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, when there were other, I think either Icelandic or Greenland volcano eruptions a few years ago. I don't think it's the precise one in Reykjavik.
No.
And all the flights of the universe were grounded. And so we were stranded in an Innocence Project conference in Atlanta. And Atlanta is, apart from Martin Luther King's birthplace, which is a very pleasant place to visit, it's not a particularly nice city. So we rented a car and we ended up in Savannah, Georgia, which has led to a piece I think you're publishing next on Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, the site of the John Byrne novel. But there I was in Savannah, utterly destitute because we had been stranded for 2 or 3 weeks, and I couldn't afford a sausage. And we're going back the following day, and I'm in a second-hand bookstore, and Savannah is populated by fabulous places like that. Sir, you seem to be interested in old books. There's an old pile of real good ones down there in the corner. So a first edition, first impression from Scott of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby with its dust wrapper on. Now, there's a punch to this story. For a couple of hundred. And I knew it was worth 20, 30,000. No money. Could you keep it for a week? Oh, yeah, sure, sir. You ship it to Ireland? Yeah, sure. I go back to Dublin the following day, I think. Walk in. This is bookending the conversation. Walk into the bank. You know, the banks that are now getting people to work at home if they don't give them a mortgage. I was a dean of a law faculty. I had a salary coming in. I just wanted a little overdraft. No, we can't do that. We can't give you. I said, it's worth 20,000. It's a first edition of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. They wouldn't give me an overdraft loan for it. By the time I got a few quid together, all friends, the book had gone. But if I had walked into the bank, a failed property speculator, a failed banker, owing zillions, they'd have given me everything I wanted.
Oh, God,
this is how the warped universe has become. They won't allow you now get a mortgage unless you work at home and do their bidding.
Yeah.
It's getting crazy.
This is the volcano in Reykjavik.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, no one's flying anyway, but maybe it's again an attribution of, in 600 years, Gaia groaning and Gaia complaining and saying things are out of control. Iceland is an interesting place, though. Remember the moral choice that the Icelandic people made in 2008 was the same moral choice the Irish people had to make. And what the Icelanders did was they jailed the toxic bankers and they enforced Keynesian stabilization, and Iceland has recovered and Iceland is stable again.
Yeah.
What we did was we set up the bad bank Nama, which is a property speculator and operation for all the failed mega rich, inflicted austerity on the Irish people. Most of the bankers did not go to prison, and we went down the shithole and we're worse now. Whereas the Icelanders did the right thing. I've been encouraging you, and I encourage your readership, because some of them now seem to suggest that I write things that remind them of books they've never read. And since they're all self-isolating at home, they're obviously trying to get a good reading list of fiction. If I can be an informal cultural commissar to the literate Irish public, which are your readership, unlike the political classes and professional classes who are beyond redemption, then there is a great Icelandic book which in some respects shows why Iceland did what it did in 2008. It's by a Nobel Prize winner called Halldór Laxness, and it's called Independent People. Now, I've written something about it that hasn't been published yet, but it is about the rugged pursuit of independence and the rugged hostility towards arbitrary tyranny, authority, and power that is necessary. Now, it does, the cautionary tale, lead to his self-destruction. One can be too stubborn. But the point is, that is what is missing in Ireland now. Independent people, or independent people who have an audience, who are taken seriously and are accorded the appropriate respect for viewpoints that are not endorsed by the corporate state. And it is badly and sorely needed. And it was always, of course, a feature of the Irish character, but decades of compliance and educational dysfunctionality and drop in standards have been an absolute disaster.
Well, Iceland
it truly is frightening.
Yeah, Iceland is an extraordinary place, and I really recommend anybody who hasn't been there to go there.
I've never been there. I would love to go there, but will anybody be allowed to go anywhere at the moment? I mean, the world will be divided up into those who take vaccines and get vaccine passports, which will probably have all sorts of information and data restricting your movements anyway, on the assumption borders open up or shut down, or open up or shut down for short spaces of time. You know,
good place to sit out the Brave New World, isn't it, Iceland?
Well, funnily enough, it's in. Did you not know that in A Brave New World, there is a famous line that you either comply or we'll ship you off to a station in Iceland.
Is that right?
I can send it to you afterwards. Doubtless, one of your readers will post the precise reference on the site.
That's fascinating.
But there actually is that precise phrase.
Well, David, on that bombshell, we must leave it. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Not at all. And hopefully, I'll talk about Iceland in the context of that Midnight in the Garden, Good and Evil piece.
Absolutely.
With that.
Absolutely.
Okay, take care. Have a nice day.